Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. He was born into a world defined by survival, where loyalty was fragile and betrayal could come from within your own tribe. From the windswept steppes of Mongolia, a boy named Temujin emerged, not as a prince, but as an outcast. His father poisoned by rivals, his family abandoned by allies, and his childhood marked by hunger and fear, Temujin's early life was anything but royal. He was hunted, enslaved, and stripped of everything, except his will to endure. What rose from that suffering was not just a man, but a force of nature. With ruthless cunning and unmatched military vision, Temujin would carve out a path of vengeance and ambition. He united warring clans not with promises, but with strength, transforming scattered tribes into one unstoppable force, the Mongol Empire. Under the name Genghis Khan, he would lead them across deserts, mountains, and continents, building an empire that stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Europe. But this is not just a tale of conquest. It's about how a man forged, through violence, reshaped the world, not just with the sword, but with law, trade, and revolution. His enemies called him a monster, his people a hero, and history still struggles to define him. Genghis Khan's story is one of brutal beginnings, relentless ambition, and a legacy that continues to echo across the centuries. All while visuals flash in rapid sequence, galloping horsemen sweeping across the plains, maps bleeding outward. In every direction, the smoldering remains of cities and golden script overlaying ancient texts, setting the stage for a saga that defies imagination. This isn't just history. It's the making of a legend. More than 800 years after his death, the shadow of Genghis Khan still stretches across the world. His name evokes images of conquest and bloodshed, but his legacy goes far beyond the battlefield. At a time when the Mongol tribes were fractured by constant infighting and bound by clan rivalries, Genghis Khan did the unthinkable. He united them under a single banner. Through alliances, strategy, and sheer force of will, he transformed a scattered collection of nomadic groups into one of the most disciplined and fearsome military forces in human history. Under his leadership, this newly forged Mongol Empire would explode across Asia and into Europe, creating the largest contiguous empire the world has ever known. From the shores of the Pacific to the heart of Eastern Europe, the Mongols didn't just conquer, they connected. Genghis Khan revolutionized warfare by using speed, deception, and adaptability on a scale never before seen. But his genius extended beyond war. He understood the value of commerce and communication. He secured and expanded the Silk Road, making it safer than it had ever been, allowing the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultures between East and West at an unprecedented level. His rule introduced diplomatic practices that were remarkably modern: religious tolerance, a merit-based system of promotion, and even the use of passports to facilitate travel across vast territories. The systems he built laid the groundwork for international trade networks that would shape the medieval world and influence global structures for centuries. The legacy of Genghis Khan runs deeper than conquest or administration. It is etched into the very bloodlines of humanity. In 2003, a groundbreaking genetic study revealed that nearly 1 in 200 men alive today carry a Y chromosome that can be traced back to a single common ancestor in the Mongol Empire, most likely Genghis Khan himself. This wasn't simply the result of chance. It was the consequence of an empire that not only expanded through war, but sustained itself through dynastic rule and elite intermarriage across vast regions. Khan's male descendants were often given positions of power and privilege, allowed to rule far-flung territories and father large families. Over time, this helped seed his lineage across a territory that stretched from the heart of Asia to the edges of Europe. But even beyond genetics, the blueprint of the modern world still shows the fingerprints of his influence. The Mongol conquests redrew the borders of kingdoms and shattered empires, carving out new regions that evolved into modern nations like Russia, China, and Iran. In places where once there had been dozens of tribal factions or feuding warlords, Genghis Khan imposed centralized governance and codified laws like the Yasa, which laid the groundwork for more unified political identities. His reimagining of warfare, favoring speed, intelligence gathering, and psychological dominance continues to influence military strategy today. He pioneered the use of mobile cavalry units for rapid assault and flexible retreat, concepts echoed in the modern emphasis on maneuver warfare. And in commerce, his efforts to secure trade routes like the Silk Road didn't just promote economic growth, they connected continents. Under his empire, merchants, scholars, and diplomats could travel from Venice to Beijing under the protection of the Mongol banner. That level of international cooperation and connectivity was centuries ahead of its time. So while the man died in 1227, his reach has proven timeless. His DNA flows through living veins, his influence is embedded in the structures of nations, and his strategies echo in both business and battlefields. Genghis Khan was not just a man of his era, he helped define the one we live in now. Temujin was born in 1162 into the harsh and unforgiving environment of the Mongolian steppes, where survival depended on strength, loyalty, and the protection of a tribe. His birth was unremarkable at the time, just another child born to a minor chieftain, but his destiny would be shaped by tragedy and struggle from the earliest days. His father, Yasuge, was a respected warrior and leader who hoped to pass on his authority and alliances to his son. But when Temujin was just 9 years old, Yasuge was poisoned by rivals, and with his death, the fragile bonds of tribal allegiance quickly dissolved. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Temujin's family, his mother Holin and several siblings, were cast out by their own clan. In Mongol society, where alliances were everything, this betrayal was a death sentence. The family was left to fend for themselves, abandoned on the steppes without warriors, protection, or provisions. They scraped by on what they could forage, wild roots, small game, and whatever they could scavenge. Hunger was a constant companion, and survival was a daily battle. This period of poverty and exile wasn't just physically taxing, it reshaped Temujin's understanding of power, loyalty, and leadership. It was during these formative years that Temujin began to harden. He saw firsthand how quickly loyalty could vanish, how alliances could be broken with a whisper, and how trust could lead to ruin. Betrayal wasn't abstract, it was deeply personal. Even among his own kin, there was conflict. At one point, he killed his half-brother Bektor in a dispute over food and dominance, a grim reflection of the brutal law of survival that ruled his world. These early struggles forged a relentless will within him. Temujin learned to lead not through inherited status, but by earning loyalty through courage, decisiveness, and fairness, qualities that stood in stark contrast to the fragile and often treacherous clan politics of the time. He began attracting followers not because of noble birth, but because he offered something rare: stability, protection, and vision. In a world torn apart by feuds and fear, Temujin's ability to overcome betrayal and poverty would become the foundation of his rise, and the making of a conqueror whose name would echo through history. Temujin's rise from a hunted exile to the unifier of the Mongol tribes was not fueled by destiny. It was earned through sheer force of character, ruthless pragmatism, and a deep understanding of human nature. On the steppes, power was traditionally passed through noble bloodlines, but Temujin broke that mold. He recognized that loyalty and talent were more valuable than lineage. He offered leadership roles not to aristocrats, but to those who had proven themselves in battle and shown unwavering loyalty. This radical shift challenged the tribal aristocracy, but gave Temujin a devoted core of warriors who knew they had earned their place, not inherited it. To bring the fractious Mongol tribes under one banner, Temujin used a mix of diplomacy, marriage alliances, strategic warfare, and, when necessary, sheer brutality. He punished betrayal swiftly and rewarded loyalty generously. His charisma drew followers who admired his discipline and clarity of vision, but his greatest strength lay in his ability to turn enemies into allies. He understood the importance of unity in a land where disunity meant death. Tribe by tribe, he defeated rival factions or brought them into his fold, creating an army unlike any the steppes had ever seen. Among his early allies was Jamuka, a childhood friend and blood brother or Anda. The two once shared dreams of uniting the Mongols, but as Temujin's power grew and his reforms disrupted the traditional hierarchy, their friendship turned into bitter rivalry. Jamukha represented the old ways, the entrenched tribal elite who saw Temujin's rise as a threat to their privilege. Their struggle came to a head in 1187 when Jamukha's forces defeated Temujin's smaller army and executed many of his captured men in an act of horrific cruelty, boiling them alive. It was a defining moment, one that showed Temujin the cost of half measures and mercy in the brutal game of power. But he didn't break. Temujin regrouped, learned from defeat, and returned stronger. Over time, his vision and organization proved more powerful than old tribal loyalties. By 1206, after years of conflict, he emerged as the undisputed leader of the Mongols. At a great tribal assembly known as a Kurultai, he was given the title of Genghis Khan, universal ruler. This wasn't just a personal victory. It marked the birth of a new Mongol identity, forged not by bloodline but by shared purpose and power under a leader who had risen from nothing to command everything. Once Genghis Khan had united the Mongol tribes, his ambition turned outward. His vision was not limited to the steppes. He saw the world as something that could be reshaped under his rule. His first major campaign was against the Western Xia dynasty in northwestern China. The Xia had refused to provide military support to the Mongols, which Genghis took as both an insult and a challenge. He launched a series of assaults that demonstrated his growing military prowess, combining speed, precision, and relentless pressure until the Xia capitulated. This victory marked the Mongols' emergence as a force that could challenge even established dynasties. Next, he turned his sights on the powerful Jin dynasty, which controlled a large portion of northern China. Despite their wealth and numbers, the Jin forces were no match for Mongol tactics. Genghis Khan's armies used a mobile form of warfare that overwhelmed static fortifications. Mongol horsemen were deadly, fast, and highly coordinated, often moving in loose formations that could strike, retreat, and strike again before their enemies could respond. These campaigns proved that the Mongols were not merely raiders, they were conquerors with a plan, but the real test of Genghis Khan's empire building would come further west in Central Asia. When the Khwarezmian Empire, a sprawling and wealthy Islamic state, executed Mongol merchants and ambassadors under suspicion of espionage, Genghis responded with fury. He launched one of the most devastating invasions in history. Cities like Bukhara, Samarkand, and Nishapur were sacked with brutal efficiency. But these attacks weren't just driven by vengeance. They were calculated demonstrations of Mongol power. Genghis understood the psychology of fear. He allowed stories of his wrath to spread ahead of his armies, forcing cities to surrender without a fight. Entire populations were sometimes spared if they submitted, others were annihilated if they resisted. This calculated brutality saved resources and instilled terror across continents. Underlying this success was not just battlefield brilliance, but a system of discipline and intelligence that made the Mongol army one of the most effective in history. Soldiers were organized into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, with strict rules about loyalty, supplies, and chain of command. Scouting and communication networks were so advanced that messages could travel hundreds of miles in days. And before attacking, Mongol spies would gather extensive intelligence on terrain, fortifications, and local politics, ensuring every campaign was executed with precision. To unify this vast and culturally diverse empire, Genghis Khan instituted a legal code known as the Yasa. It was a flexible but firm set of laws that enforced discipline among his troops, regulated commerce, and maintained order among his subjects. It outlawed theft, defined rules for military conduct, and even protected religious freedom, recognizing that tolerance would stabilize the vast regions under his control. The Yasa was never written down in full, but its spirit echoed in every aspect of Mongol governance, reinforcing a sense of unity even among people who had once been enemies. And that's what truly set Genghis Khan apart. While many conquerors in history have seized territory only to watch it fall apart after their death, Genghis Khan built an empire designed to outlast him. He developed an intricate administrative system that balanced autonomy with loyalty. He placed trusted generals and family members in charge of newly conquered regions, but also implemented systems to ensure they remained accountable. Trade was actively promoted across the Silk Road, protected by Mongol patrols, which created an unprecedented level of safety and stability from East Asia to Europe. He also understood that culture could be a unifying force. Rather than imposing Mongol customs on his subjects, he often allowed local traditions and religions to flourish, as long as they didn't challenge his authority. This tolerance made the Mongol Empire unusually cohesive for its size. In cities like Samarkand and Karakoram, scholars, engineers, and artists from all corners of the known world gathered, sharing ideas and techniques. The empire became a hub of cultural and scientific exchange, not just military conquest. Even in death, Genghis Khan's legacy endured. His sons and grandsons expanded the empire even further, building on the structures he had put in place. The empire he forged wasn't just the largest in contiguous landmass, it was one of the most effective, sophisticated, and transformative in human history. His name became more than legend. It became a symbol of what raw willpower, when fused with discipline and vision, could achieve. The world had never seen anything like him before, and arguably it never has since. The revival of the Silk Road under Genghis Khan's rule was not just about the exchange of material goods, it was about the free flow of ideas and innovations across vast distances. This unprecedented connection between the East and West created a cultural fusion that accelerated the progress of entire civilizations. For example, the exchange of scientific knowledge and technology flourished. The Arabs introduced the Mongols to advanced mathematics, while the Chinese shared their expertise in printing, papermaking, and gunpowder. This exchange of knowledge wasn't limited to intellectual spheres. It also extended to art, architecture, and language, fostering a new era of cross-cultural exchange. The Mongol Empire's ability to protect these trade routes and maintain stability across such vast territories provided a sense of security for merchants and travelers. This stability was a vital force in connecting distant regions and encouraged people from different parts of the world to engage with each other in ways that were previously unthinkable. It wasn't just about goods or ideas. It was the very act of bringing people together from different cultures, creating networks of trade, diplomacy, and cooperation that helped shape the global world as we know it today. Through this interconnectedness, the Mongol Empire helped lay the foundation for future trade routes, like the ones that would later develop during the Age of Exploration. The Mongols, by weaving together the disparate threads of Eurasian cultures, accelerated the movement of information and the diffusion of technologies, contributing to the rise of the Renaissance in Europe and the advancement of sciences and philosophies across Asia. In this sense, Genghis Khan's legacy is not just the empire he built, but the interconnected world that empire helped foster, bridging gaps and igniting new possibilities for cross-cultural understanding and progress. Genghis Khan's approach to religious tolerance was groundbreaking in an era defined by religious intolerance and conflict. While much of the world was embroiled in crusades, inquisitions, and forced conversions, the Mongol Empire stood as an example of how pluralism could be a unifying force rather than a source of division. Genghis Khan's empire spanned diverse regions, home to a vast array of religions: Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, shamanism, and more. And rather than imposing a single belief system, Genghis allowed religious freedom to flourish within his empire. This tolerance wasn't merely a gesture of goodwill, it was a pragmatic political strategy. Genghis Khan understood that forcing his subjects into religious conformity would lead to internal strife, rebellion, and discontent. By granting religious freedom, he reduced the potential for conflict between religious groups, allowing people to coexist peacefully despite their differences. This policy also had practical benefits. Religious leaders often held significant social and political influence, and by securing their loyalty, Genghis ensured stability and governance in the farthest reaches of his empire. More than that, religious tolerance allowed for the exchange of ideas. Scholars from different faiths could work together, share knowledge, and teach each other. Islamic scientists, Christian theologians, and Buddhist philosophers all contributed to a dynamic intellectual environment. This fusion of knowledge across religious and cultural lines not only enriched Mongol society, but also facilitated the transfer of advanced ideas to other parts of the world. For example, Islamic medicine, mathematical theories from India, and Chinese inventions like gunpowder and papermaking all traveled along Mongol-controlled routes, influencing the course of human history. In this way, Genghis Khan's religious tolerance was a key element in his broader vision of an empire that embraced diversity while remaining unified. His policy helped forge a world where ideas could cross borders without fear of persecution, laying the groundwork for an interconnected world where people could live and learn from one another, regardless of faith. This enduring legacy of tolerance set the Mongol Empire apart from many of its contemporaries and helped foster a rich, multicultural environment that would influence global development for centuries. In addition to fostering trade and religious freedom, the Mongols played a crucial role in spreading technology and knowledge across continents. Chinese innovations like gunpowder, papermaking, and printing reached the West, while Persian and Arab advancements in medicine, astronomy, and engineering flowed into Asia. The Mongol postal relay system, the YAM, enabled swift communication across thousands of miles, paving the way for efficient administration and long-distance coordination, an early model of globalization in action. And then there's the legacy written into our very DNA. A groundbreaking 2003 genetic study found that around 8% of men in a large region of Asia, roughly 16 million today, carry a Y chromosome lineage traced back to a single ancestor who lived about 800 years ago. That ancestor is believed to be Genghis Khan, or a close male relative. This astonishing finding speaks not only to the breadth of his empire, but to the intimate and personal nature of conquest in that era, where leaders often claimed women and land in equal measure. Genghis Khan's impact is not just a relic of the past, it's a living force. In the revival of global trade, in the intermingling of cultures and technologies, and even in the bloodlines of millions, his legacy endures. He reshaped the world not just through warfare, but by constructing a system that connected civilizations, transformed societies, and anticipated many of the dynamics that define our world today. Genghis Khan's legacy is a complex tapestry of brilliance and brutality, with contrasting views of his character depending on the cultural lens through which he is viewed. To some, particularly in the West, he has been cast as a genocidal tyrant, a conqueror whose empire was built on bloodshed and fear. Accounts from those who fell under his rule often highlight the mass slaughters of civilians and the sheer scale of destruction that accompanied his campaigns. The annihilation of entire cities, such as Nishapur and Samarkand, where hundreds of thousands were killed, has led to his portrayal as a ruthless destroyer, a man who imposed his will through terror and violent force. However, in the East, particularly in Mongolia and parts of Central Asia, Genghis Khan is regarded not only as a conqueror, but as a national hero and a brilliant reformer. His vision of governance, military strategy, and cultural exchange have elevated him to the status of a founding father, credited with uniting disparate tribes and creating a flourishing multicultural empire. In this light, Genghis Khan is seen as a visionary who laid the foundations for modern global trade, championed religious tolerance, and promoted merit-based leadership, transcending traditional tribal loyalties. His laws, the Yasa, brought order to a previously fractured society, and his military innovations revolutionized warfare. The contrast in these two portrayals highlights the dual nature of his legacy. While his military campaigns were undeniably brutal, his long-term contributions to global civilization cannot be overlooked. His empire facilitated the exchange of ideas, technologies, and cultures across vast territories, linking the East and West in ways that had never been seen before. Genghis Khan helped usher in a new era of connectivity, trade, and communication that shaped the world for generations. In terms of what we can learn from Genghis Khan's life today, his story offers valuable lessons about leadership, resilience, and the complexity of human nature. His ability to overcome personal hardship, growing up in poverty and surviving betrayals, illustrates the power of perseverance. His rise from the son of a murdered tribal chief to the ruler of the largest contiguous empire in history shows that vision, strategy, and adaptability can overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. He also teaches the importance of flexibility in leadership. His policies of merit-based promotions and religious tolerance reflect an open-mindedness that allowed him to build a diverse and functional empire. Genghis Khan's life is a powerful illustration of the complexities inherent in the pursuit of greatness. His empire, one of the largest the world has ever known, was forged through relentless ambition and brutal force. While his military genius and visionary leadership resulted in lasting advancements in governance, trade, and culture, the means, by which he achieved his empire were often violent and destructive. The devastation his conquest caused to civilian populations is well documented. Entire cities were razed, populations were massacred, and countless innocent lives were lost in the wake of his military campaigns. The siege of Nishapur, for example, saw an estimated 1.7 million people killed, and the destruction of cities like Samarkand and Baghdad left long-lasting scars on the populations. The Mongols used terror as a strategic weapon, spreading fear and demoralizing enemies by executing entire populations. This kind of brutality was a central part of their tactics, and many see Genghis Khan's campaigns as emblematic of a larger historical trend in which conquest often meant untold human suffering. However, it's important to recognize that Genghis Khan's ambition wasn't solely about conquest for the sake of power. He sought to create a unified and efficient empire, a system that would transcend tribal divisions and facilitate trade, cultural exchange, and the spread of knowledge. His innovations in military tactics and governance, such as the use of spies, psychological warfare, and merit-based promotion, were groundbreaking. His empire laid the groundwork for the modern era, where the Silk Road was revitalized, connecting the East and West in ways that shaped global commerce, culture, and ideas for centuries to come. The tension between Genghis Khan's brutality and his contributions to world history lies at the heart of his legacy. On one hand, he was a ruthless conqueror whose wars brought immeasurable suffering. On the other hand, he was a visionary who, despite his violent means, sought to create an empire that was both pragmatic and inclusive. His policy of religious tolerance, for instance, was revolutionary in an era dominated by religious conflict. By allowing diverse faiths to flourish within his empire, he helped foster an atmosphere of intellectual and cultural exchange that benefited humanity. Thus, when we consider Genghis Khan, we face a difficult dichotomy: the greatness of his empire and the suffering it caused. His military genius and administrative reforms were extraordinary, yet they were achieved through violence and fear. The human cost of his empire building cannot be overlooked, but his legacy also serves as a reminder of the complexities of leadership. Greatness, in his case, was inseparable from cruelty. His ability to unite vast territories and influence the course of history was achieved through methods that would be considered morally indefensible by modern standards. In the end, the question of whether Genghis Khan was a monster or a mastermind is subjective and depends on the lens through which we view him. His impact on the world was undeniable. He reshaped the course of history, and his legacy continues to resonate in modern culture, politics, and genetics. But his story also reminds us of the ethical dilemmas that often accompany power and ambition. Genghis Khan's life serves as both a testament to the heights of human achievement and a cautionary tale about the costs of empire building. It's a legacy marked by brilliance and brutality in equal measure, one that demands us to confront the complexities of history and the difficult choices that shape the course of nations. Genghis Khan's influence on Eurasian history is truly unmatched. His conquests, military innovations, and visionary leadership laid the foundation for an empire that stretched across much of the known world, forever altering the course of history. From the revival of the Silk Road to his policies of religious tolerance and cultural exchange, Genghis Khan's legacy continues to shape our modern world. His ability to unite disparate tribes and create one of the largest empires in history is a testament to his unmatched strategic genius. Yet, this empire was also built on violence and destruction, highlighting the darker side of his ambition. So, what do you think? Was Genghis Khan a visionary leader who changed the world for the better, or was he a ruthless conqueror whose methods left a trail of suffering? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to stay tuned for our next video, where we'll dive into what happened after Genghis Khan's death, the rise and fall of the Mongol Empire. You won't want to miss it. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Share it with others who are fascinated by history and help us bring more stories like this to life. Thanks for watching.